going to start off by getting an overview of the Future Inc. survey done by Deloitte Access Economics, and I'll be talking, as I mentioned before, to Dr. Rick Symes. I'll bring him up onto one of those chairs in a minute and we'll have a chat with him. But first, a few thoughts of my own on the economic notion which is streamed in a way through the report, the notion of creative destruction, which is somehow reflected in the report and its results and the results of the survey. Now, in these much more enlightened times, that concept is usually discussed under the very gentle title of digital disruption. If you add the word digital to pretty much anything these days, it seems to have the added benefit of seeming as hip as your local barrister's tattoos. And here's a quick quote from the report. The debate surrounding technology and employment tends to be skewed towards job destruction rather than creation, because the destruction brought about by technology is easily observed, while the creative effects are far more chaotic and unpredictable. And that, in a nutshell, is what this discussion we're about to have is all about. The prospects of finding and creating new jobs in the chaotic but potentially exciting, digitally disrupted global economy, and of creating a kind of workforce fit for the future. So in this debate, the Deloitte Access Economics Survey is a very valuable document, I think. The survey of 1,400 labour market participants does suggest that workers themselves, especially the younger ones, seem to have some idea of the gale of creative destruction that's headed their way. So to help us explain more about this and what's in the report, let me bring up, and to a huge round of applause while he gets to the stage, co-author of the report, Dr. Rick Symes, and I'll go and join him down there. Great report. Creative destruction. Does that appeal to you, that notion?
It does, and I think your explanation was really good. I think that it is much easier to observe the destruction and much harder to see the creation. But if you look at history, the creation, there have been new jobs created.
Is this a particularly destructive time, or a creatively destructive time?
Well, there are two main forces we're talking about in the report. One is globalisation and the like, and the other one is all things digital. And both of those are happening or hitting Australia quite rapidly hard. And I guess two areas to reflect on. The globalisation aspects, if you think about what's happening in the Newcastles or the North Adelaides or the northern suburbs of Melbourne or whatever, where you've got a heavy reliance on manufacturing, that's getting hit very hard, and it's very hard to adjust to it given the nature of the people there, the workers there. The other one is digital, and digital is having a much more pervasive effect on different parts of the economy. If you think about, if you think about the people in the room here, professional services are one of the areas where it can be hit. The white-collar jobs can be hit really very hard, and so.
Let me bring up our panel one by one. One of them, I have to say, has sent his apologies. He got stuck in the House, that is the Houses of Parliament. Peter Hendy sends his apologies. Andrew Bassett is the Chief Executive Officer, and come up as I say it, and give him a round of applause as he comes up. Chief Executive Officer, co-founder of Seek Limited. Seek is a top 50 ASX listed company with a market capitalisation of $5 billion. Seek has evolved from being an Australian and New Zealand online employment marketplace to now operating in 19 countries. Holly Ransom, who I mentioned earlier, another member of the Q&A family. Hi Holly, CEO of Emergent Solutions. Her company specialises in the development of high-performing intergenerational workforces, leadership and social outcomes. In 2014, the Australian Prime Minister appointed Holly to chair the G20 Youth Summit. She also co-authored the strategy paper on youth entrepreneurship. So we'll be hearing from you on that, I'm sure. Especially since she's just come back from the United States, where she was seeing, I think, how the germination of entrepreneurship is so much better treated than it is in this country. And she co-authored the strategy paper on youth entrepreneurship and unemployment for the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal Agenda. We'll have a big round of applause at the end, just little ones as I mentioned their name. Kate Carnell is the CEO of the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. ACCI is Australia's largest and most representative business organisation and a leading voice of business in Australia, advocating for more than 300,000 businesses across all industries. Renee Leon is the Secretary of the Department of Employment. Hi, Renee. Renee Leon is responsible for workplace relations policy and employment services. She's been in the public sector for more than 20 years, and without a politician here, she's going to have to carry the can for the government. Dr. Rick Symes, you've already met. I'll tell you just a little bit more about him. He's a director of Deloitte Access Economics. He's got extensive knowledge in public policy, governance, finance, econometrics, economic analysis and strategy, and he's held senior positions in the Commonwealth Treasury, academia, the Prime Minister Keating's office, and the private sector before joining what is now Deloitte Access Economics late in 2005.
I guess we never know what the future will bring.
The world isn't a 9-to-5 world anymore.
Work is taking up so much of our day now that you have to factor your family into a typical working day.
The future of work, I think there'll be two great benefits from that, and that will be flexibility, and also it will create more equality.
I can't even imagine what it's going to look like, but I think the business landscape is going to look really different in 5 years, and in 10 years, who knows.
So I think the world is going to dramatically change, and I think technology means that it's going to change really rapidly.
I think technology really gives us the opportunity to embrace change and be quite nimble in a business sense.
The digital disruption is something that's not going to go away.
You don't need to know where your customer is anymore.
Technology is always going to be disruptive, but it depends whether you see it as a good thing or a bad thing.
It's a bit of a shake-up, and I think that's a good thing.
Maybe that's where technology will take us, back to a more normal, balanced work life. And it will enable us to actually have a lot more time away from work.
The global market is so massive that generally a single business can't provide everything and be everything to everyone.
We're in a global society, globalisation. We need to talk to everybody at the snap of the fingers.
That's what the global market demands, so you need to be set up to be able to respond quickly with accurate information. I think that in the future accountants will become more consultancy and advisory based.
I think we'll ultimately, find probably that we'll get Uberized at some point. I actually think that the next 10 years we are going to see a huge amount of global standardisation and automation.
Automation is here to stay. We need to embrace it. People need to become more educated around it and how we can utilise it.
I think we have to have some of that automation, otherwise our day jobs are just going to get longer and longer and longer.
And it's turned to be a more customer focused environment.
What it'll come down to is choosing something based on comments and feedback and star ratings.
Jobs in some businesses will disappear, but it's going to create other jobs in other industries that maybe we haven't even thought of yet.
So I don't think things are going to fully change or stop, but we're going to enhance the experience.
I think we all feel like something needs to happen in terms of the ageing population. We're all living a lot longer. Just realising that actually they bring something really different to the table.
There will be businesses that don't adapt and that will suffer for that.
Unless an organisation thinks differently about getting diverse people and thinking globally, they'll miss the boat on that kind of thing. I just don't see the boundaries in the world anymore.
I think there's amazing opportunities out there.
Be optimistic, because the future as a chartered accountant is phenomenal.
I'm definitely confident about the future of work, but work has changed and work will continue to change, and we need to recognise that and be on top of it. Stay abreast of trends, political, geopolitics, and always make sure we know what's going on. Stay informed.
Kate Carnell, it's a pretty optimistic view, obviously, of the future, and judging by some of those images, we'll be spending a lot more time surfing and playing with our kids in the park, embracing automation. I'm very happy to do that if that's what it means. What do you think?
I'm pretty confident that the future is going to hold some great things. I think the challenge for us, though, is to be flexible enough to embrace them, because it's not the same. 9 to 5, Monday to Friday jobs will continue to exist but they're not going to be the norm anymore. We're going to see jobs that operate outside those hours. We're going to see more jobs. Tourism is a really interesting area, isn't it? We've just found that we got our millionth Chinese visitor to Australia, and yet we've still got a very, very small a percentage of the Chinese tourism market. We've got a huge amount of opportunity in areas like that, but we're not going to do very well if we're only open 9 to 5, Monday to Friday in tourism, are we?
To some degree, the government's going to have to come up with solutions, and your department will be tasked, I imagine, with working out what they are, for how you deal with the fears that come from collapsing industries in South Australia, as I said, in Victoria, the issues we have now with the mining industry and manufacturing generally. Do you have a task force working on this or something?
We do have a task force on the future of work, and in fact the Minister will be launching on Friday a report that we've done in conjunction with the CSIRO on the future of work and the digitally enabled workforce. So there's quite a bit of work going on, both about mapping what's happening, but also about starting to prepare the government and the community for the kinds of policy changes that they might need.
And what blew me away thumbing through this copy that she had, helping her determine what it was she was going to go study or think about doing after school, was the enormity of these job opportunities that had been listed that were going to be exactly the ones that were automated within the next probably 3 years, let alone the next 10. So I think one of the big challenges we've got is just making sure people are making informed choices, that we're getting out there and we're communicating about where the workforce is going. Because I spent a lot of time in high schools with university students, with young professionals who haven't had their expectations set up for where it is the workforce is going. And I think we need to be doing more to make sure choices are being maximised for each and every individual.
I'll stick with you just for a minute because sitting down at the table there, you told me about the trip you've just returned from in the United States. And what was really startling in that conversation to me was the comparison you made between the opportunities for young entrepreneurs in the United States and here in Australia. Just set that out for us so we can have that in our minds when we're talking about what we could do better here.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting one because you watch a lot of Australia's top young entrepreneurial talent getting poached at the moment. I've got a lot of friends that have been poached to the UK, to Sweden, to the US in particular. And over the weekend, I was visiting, of all places, St. Louis, Missouri, which is not a epicenter necessarily of economic activity. And to that exact end, a couple of years ago, they made the intentional decision that they wanted to be. And they thought about how do we go about doing that? How do we become an entrepreneurial hub? And there's a couple of things I think are really interesting in how they did that. Firstly, they've done a really good job of public-private partnership with what they've set up. You had government back a big loan to create an incubator, but they had a huge cooperation with business, with local universities, and they've created this incredible setup where they poach every year entrepreneurs from around the world. They give them $50,000 in an equity-free loan. They give them $50 a month rent in this incredible facility where they're surrounded by a community of entrepreneurs. They've got access to top IT infrastructure, 10,000 hours worth of all the pro bono help they could want in legal, accounting, you name it. And they're getting young people applying from all across the world. The other thing I think is really interesting is the fact that St. Louis have done it. And I don't mean to say that to point St. Louis out, but I think so often in this entrepreneurship conversation, we get lost in, oh, we can't be Silicon Valley or we can't be Israel. And so that almost is where the conversation ends. And the thing I love about what the community will talk to you about with what they've created in St. Louis is they thought about how they did what they did well.
I'll just take you back to the other part of the other question we were talking about earlier, and back to the STEM education thing. And we know India and China is pumping out hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of graduates with high levels of expertise in those areas. How are young Australians going to compete in that market for these kind of high-level digital jobs?
You look for us. Our business uses those people. Use the Chinese. We have 3,000 people in China, and they're smart and they're good.
Yeah.
But they work for our business. It's majority owned by an Australian company. There's a lot of people in Australia that bring the expertise, the understanding the business model, the understanding what works, some other advantages. So I think it's a matter of for us, it's much more about a partnership, saying what can the Asian companies bring, what can we bring, and there are things that we can bring, and they're number one, creating jobs in Australia, number two, creating value for Australian shareholders. It's that sort of model rather than saying we're going to bring our whole business in, we're going to bring all of our people in, and somehow beat the Chinese. They're pretty smart, the Chinese, and they've got the right skills. It's a matter of working with them.
I'm just going to throw that question around the panel, and we're pretty much out of time. So what I'd like you to do is each of you sum up what you think the critical point is. Just leave out penalty rates for now.
Okay, I promise. I think the critical issue for the future of work is flexibility and to get better relationships between skills and work. That that our schools, our vocational training, our universities and business are working closer together. So we're not bottom of the OECD, and that we understand the importance of collaboration.
Rick?
2 points. The thing I'm most worried about, and I don't think that we've got right, is the point Andrew made earlier, and that's the hollowing out or the equity issues. I think that you're seeing that big time in the US, you're seeing it in a smaller way in Australia, and that runs the risk of equity issues or social issues compromising all the positive things we're talking about. Notwithstanding it, the positive thing, I think that with flexibility and essentially the market, is the opportunities there are really live or real ones, and that's going to mean that there's going to be positive outcomes even if we don't quite get the governance issues right.
Andrew?
So I think, just to reiterate my point before, I think there's a lot of really good commentary and a lot of optimism on the supply side. So my concerns to some extent around this debate around the demand side, around companies doing enough to make sure the opportunities are there. I think if the companies do the right thing, I think our population will do the right thing.
Can you imagine what it would take to change the culture that you've described?
I think it's cultural. I'm working. I've had 3 meetings with politicians where I ear-bashed them on this stuff.
Yeah.
They couldn't get me out of the office fast enough. But I think it's culture. I think it's just changing minds. So I think we have more CEOs that actually have the courage to take the right step. If you have enough shareholders and making their noise loud enough, you have the media getting the right tone. I think stuff can turn a little bit.
Is it generational as well as cultural? In fact, is the generation in power, if you like, in business part of the problem? And will they be wiped out by the next generation?
You only gave me a minute.
Much more diverse boardrooms?
It's all connected. It's shareholders, it's boards, it's CEOs,
Yeah.
it's media. It's all connected, and it's risk aversity in Australia. It's all connected, but it's leading to a bad outcome.
Holly?
I think I'd echo what Kate said. I think definitely supporting the conditions to harness flexibility, choice to maximise that. I think making sure our policy settings support that and allow that to thrive is really important. That second bit on closing the gap in the education sense between what we have at the skills mismatch, so business and education coming much tighter together. And I think the third part would be around entrepreneurship. So how do we create that hub of activity? How do we ensure that we're supporting young people to have the skills to be enterprising? That I think is really pivotal as part of that education and business conversation.
And Renee, give you the final word.
2 things. One is that I think we just need to do much better at ensuring the young people and the parents of today understand more about what the opportunities and the declining industries are. And so I think there's a role for everyone on this panel and probably many people in this room to just do much more talking about this issue and helping people on the threshold of their career make better choices about how they skill up and how they approach their career. And the second is about needing to have the kind of culture where politicians can make longer term policy decisions, because the kind of things that we need to do, they aren't short term successes. There has to be the opportunity for governments to experiment and fail and to try things that are going to have a long term payoff rather than a short term electoral payoff. And I think something in our community culture and our media culture is making that really difficult for politicians to do at the moment, and the country as a whole would be better in this space and many others if we allowed that kind of long-term policy work to flourish.
Well, there's no way of summarising such a complex and intelligent discussion. I would say that's, on this subject in particular, the best discussion I've ever heard. So I'd like you to please thank our panellists for their wonderful contributions. I think I'll hand you over to Lee at this point. Thank you very much.